You are listening to The Underground Subway with host David Alston, a podcast dedicated to giving you the strategies to live a free and better life. Here is David Alston.
Hi, I'm David Alston, and welcome to the Underground Subway podcast. I want to thank you for joining us once again. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to sit and listen to what we have to talk about. This podcast is dedicated to doing what we need to do to make life better for others around us and making life better for ourselves. The Underground Subway gets its name from the Underground Railroad. It was run by the late, great Harriet Tubman, who happened to be my grandmother's first cousin. But we're in 2022, so we don't do the Underground Railroad. We do the Underground Subway. And Harriet led so many people to freedom that were in bondage. And it is our assignment to do the same, to lead so many people to freedom, to lead as many people to freedom as we can. Harriet said that I would have led so many more to freedom if only they knew they were slaves. Well, so many of us, we don't really realize that we are in bondage. We don't have the ability to live, to think, to function without the restraints of life. And sometimes the struggles of life, sometimes the trials of life will keep us bound and keep us in a situation in which we are not free. But this podcast is dedicated to doing whatever we need to do to make sure that you can be free. And so that being said, we come to you every week and we discuss topics and strategies. What do I need to put in my GPS system to get free? What do I need to put in my GPS system to tell me where I am, where I'm going? How long is it going to take to get there? What route do I need to take? And then we have to hit the go button. One of the things we do is we often talk to you. And then, of course, lately, every week, we're coming back with special guests. We have some guests that have really wowed us and really inspired us to go forward, to push, to make life better. And this particular podcast is no different. I have a special guest with me that I am super excited to have with me. I'm super excited that this special guest and my guest has consented to come and join the Underground Subway. And I want to get out of the way so we can hear from him. And I believe he's going to inspire us and move us forward. His name is Mr. Thomas Griggs. And Thomas Griggs, let me tell you a little bit about our guest, Thomas Griggs. Since 1992, Thomas Shelden Griggs has worked with leadership teams to rebuild splintered communities and save organizations from extinction. Clients from organizations such as Lehigh University, that's up in my neck of the woods, being from Philly, and the Mankind Project, USA, have said this, I quote, "He gets people to talk when no one else can." And I personally witnessed him bring a full boardroom from entrenched negative assumptions and expectations to trust and resolution in a matter of hours. Dr. Griggs is the author of an upcoming book that's going to be released called How to Save the World and Be Home in Time for Dinner. He's also doing that same year-long leadership training with that same topic. Today, he also offers plenty of ideas to navigate life and work post-pandemic. I want to welcome to the Underground Subway my guest, Mr. Thomas Griggs. Welcome, Mr. Dr. Griggs. Thank you for joining us on the Underground Subway.
Thank you for having me, David. I'm delighted to be here, and I really appreciate your mission and your work, and honored to follow in the footsteps of Miss Tubman. That's quite an inspirational challenge to step up to that legacy. So thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. Thank you for consenting to be with us. I want to get right into this because I know that you have so much to offer. Thomas, let's just get right into it. I was recently at a training a little while ago, a couple of weeks ago, and the training was dealing with leadership and dealing with changing paradigms, changing the way the rules, the way the boundaries, how things are operating. And it was talking to leaders, and in reading your bio, I noticed that you have a specialty, a special gift and talent to work with people that are leaders. And there are various forms of leadership. It doesn't have to necessarily mean that you're a leader of a Fortune 500 company. You can be a principal at an elementary school, or a leader in your local church group, or, something like that. And I want to ask you about leaders, because I'm noticing that a lot of leaders, they do things one way, but my question is, what are some, in your experience, what are some of the common mistakes that you see leaders make when conflicts arise? Because I've been around leaders that can't handle conflict very well.
Sure. Yeah, that is a good place to start. The first thing that comes to mind, I call it level myopia. It's the ability to only see what I am used to seeing, or what I'm trained to see. It's the problem of the person holding the hammer looks like a nail. And we live in a psychological era, back from the 20s and the 30s, when depth psychology was invented. Freud and Jung and Adler and these other folks came along and supposed that we have an unconscious mind. But I think the public was fascinated by that, and I think we swallowed that pill. And I'd say we've been gagging on it ever since. And what I mean by that is, it's often a default that leaders want to psychologize the conflict. They want to analyze the personalities of the employees, or the board members, or the strategic partners, or the program recipients, or the parishioners, whoever it is. And I'm trained as a clinical psychologist. I've got 2 masters and a doctorate in that area. And I spend most of my time discouraging people from taking a psychological perspective, because even if you're right about your diagnosis, you can't really use it. It's generally offensive to interpret other people's personalities. And most of the time, when we're in a conflict and we're interpreting somebody's personality, it's a cloak for passing judgment on them. This person is passive aggressive, or this person is a perfectionist, or this person is a workaholic, or this person is not motivated enough. And as soon as we go to that personal level of analysis, we've dug ourselves into a hole that can be pretty hard to get out of.
Wow.
So that's the first common mistake, is not having a systematic set of choices that we can analyze a conflict and determine what the nature of the conflict is, and pick out the right approach. Psychological is only one possible approach to dealing with a conflict or a troubled employee.
Wow. I want to say a term that I want to mention, a term that I consider personally not a dirty word, because it's a term. And if you can elaborate on this term that I consider a dirty term. What about that employee that, or the leader, doesn't have to be the employee. What about the leader that says, we've always done it this way?
Well, every situation is a little different. There are some situations in which that is what you want to do. You do want to respect tradition, and you do want to be consistent. Other times, you particularly need a new approach. So I would want to get information about, what is the problem we're trying to solve? If a leader, for example, uses that phrase over and over and over and over, it may be that it's going to be difficult to invite them into discovering some new solutions. And that's where this system of epic leadership that I've developed kicks in, because I teach leaders that you have 6 general approaches that you might take to the conflict. And let's talk about which one is going to make the most sense. So sometimes, if this person wants to do things because that's the way they've always been done, maybe that they want to honor their cultural heritage. And they don't want to do things the way other people are doing them. I've been in organizations where folks want to do it the way their grandparents did it. and they don't want to do it the way that millennials are doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So that becomes a cultural conversation about cultural differences.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Other times, the person, say, might be at odds with a group of people who want to go in a different direction, and we need a group dialogue process to where everybody can come to an agreement and not single out that one individual who is
Right.
saying
Right.
that. You
Right.
don't want to isolate them and make them the problem. It's better if we can define the problem in a way that involves a lot of people, because then we got more resources to solve it.
Wow, that is great. That is great. A question, and I hope I'm not going in the left field. How
Please
important
do.
is it? How important is it to? And I know you see this. You don't necessarily see it in some businesses, but there's some, whether it's community groups or churches or whatever. How important is it? I heard a saying one time. Someone says that you're really not successful in any type of business. You're not successful without a successor. How important is it to, number one, to have someone that you are leading but yet training to replace you down the road? And how important is it to keep in mind that you can't be intimidated by that person?
Well, okay, so extremely important for a lot of reasons. The first thing that comes to mind is I work with a lot of nonprofits, a lot of organizations that are out to make the world a better place. And because of the age wave, all of the boomers who have been heads of these nonprofits and these social venture organizations, they're retiring in a massive wave over the
Right.
last 10 years and the next 10 years. So they're needing to turn things over to the next generation, not just to a successor who's just like them, but they're needing to turn it over to the next generation of leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's a cultural conversation. So the younger people, the next generation, always have different ideas about how to do things and, excuse me, in what direction we need to go.
Mm-hmm.
So framing the challenge of succession planning as a fascinating conversation between cultural groups, I think is a good way to go. I think it puts it in the right context. And I think succession planning is then something that becomes a learning adventure for everybody concerned, because they're now looking at their own assumptions, their own cultural traditions and habits compared to those of another group. And the organization's success and endurance, longevity, depends on our ability to negotiate those differences with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, succession planning doesn't have a chance to succeed.
And again, you can't be intimidated by the person that's that you're grooming. You know that they may quote unquote do it better than you are doing it now.
Yeah, and here's an interesting thing. So if you take the idea of intimidation, that is what I would call a psychological frame of reference.
Okay.
We're sort of attributing a personality characteristic or an emotional characteristic to the person.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of difficult to work with that frame of reference. I would rather frame it as a group phenomenon, that this person that you're looking at who is feeling intimidated and they're acting that way, I would want to frame the conversation that there's a huge group of people all across this country and in fact overseas who are struggling with exactly the same problem of how to share authority and how to turn over authority and control. And it's a very tricky thing. So if we frame it that way, then we can catch the person in our net, that individual who's struggling with it.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm probably not going to want to use a psychological descriptor. I'd rather define the problem in a way that includes a lot of people and normalizes it. And then this individual who's got to turn authority over to somebody else is in an instant support group.
Wow. Right.
Because there's lots and lots of you who have the
Right.
same noble and worthy issue. It's not a character flaw. It's a known cultural wave of, challenge.
Wow. That's
Respectful.
powerful. That's powerful. That's very powerful. So what should you do? We talked about leadership. We talked about how to handle that conflict. What about what should a manager or someone in leadership do when they suspect that they have a troubled employee or troubled member of their organization?
Well, that's I spent actually about 10 years doing that professionally.
Okay.
And so the industry of the Employee Assistance Program, EAPs,
Right.
that used to exist back in the
Yes.
80s,
Yes.
uh, we worked with, I set up programs for IBM, GlaxoSmithKline, and also municipalities, cities, and nonprofits, whoever wanted a program, we would set it up. Our specialty was the ability to look at the entire system and come up with a definition of the problem that was respectful and could give us opportunities to solve it. So we would account for an individual's capability and competency, their awareness, their training, whether they were up to the job. We'd also look at interpersonal relationships, because sometimes the issue is that one person can't work with another, but there's nothing wrong with the individual that they're struggling with. They just don't know how to work with them.
Right.
And I had a woman who with a Chinese background upbringing in mainland China, who was trying to work with a typical white engineer medical officer in a company. And she said she wouldn't work with him. She just was so uncomfortable with him. And the solution wasn't anything wrong with the medical officer. It's that in her culture, his behavior was unacceptable. So we had to find out the story. So that was an interpersonal and a cultural issue. Other times we want, as I said before, we want a group solution. We want to make the whole team responsible for the behavior of the individual. And they do that in Japan a lot. If the person's struggling, it's because the team did not define the job well enough or give them enough support. And so the whole team needs to pitch in and make this right.
Right.
And so they don't even have, at least, back when I got out of grad school, they didn't have individual psychotherapy in Japan. One of my classmates went over there and set up a practice, and the only clients he had were American expats. The Japanese folks just didn't even look at things that way.
Right.
So that's what we're looking at. And then it could be an institutional problem, like there simply isn't adequate training to define the job.
Exactly.
There's
right.
not an adequate performance development review system. And sometimes somebody's being made a scapegoat for a story that got out, and the organization's reputation is suffering. And so they make an individual the troubled person in order to get rid of them, as if that will get rid of their problem. But it never should have been defined as a personal, individual troubled employee. So I want to know, there's 6 different possibilities about where the conflict arose from, and therefore there are 6 possible approaches and 6 skill sets.
Well, I'm very curious as to this next question. I've been waiting to ask you this one ever since I introduced you. What does that title, what does that mean, the title of your training and the title of your newly upcoming to be released book that says How to Save the World and Be Home in Time for Dinner? What in the world does that mean?
Well, you could probably guess.
Yeah, I can, but I want to hear it.
All right.
Well, let me say it like, let me stop you, take a time out. Your bio talks about Lehigh University, and I'm from Philly. So my favorite movie is Philadelphia. And I ask all of my guests this question at some point in time. I'm from Philadelphia, and the movie Philadelphia with Tom Hanks and Denzel Washington. And one of Denzel Washington, who was an attorney, he asks one of the witnesses a question, and he says, explain it to me like I'm a 6-year-old. So explain it to me like I'm a 6-year-old. What does that mean to save the world and be home in time for dinner?
Okay. Yeah, that it's good that you would say that, because I used to work on the book. I was writing the book, and I would work in a chocolate factory every Saturday from open to close. They had a
Wow.
coffee shop in the chocolate factory in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Okay.
And one day, a whole family came up to my desk, or my table where I was writing on my laptop, and I had a sticker on my computer that said, "Ask me about my book."
Oh,
So
wow.
these six kids came up as a group and asked me about my book. And one of them was 5 years old, and one was 7, and one was 10, one was 14, and one was 17 or 18. And so I started with the youngest one, and I gave them the answer to the question you just asked, one by one at a time, and asked them, did that make sense to you?
Wow.
And I didn't go up to the next older one until the younger one said, yes, I understand. So what I said to the youngest one was, you know how sometimes your mom and dad work really hard and they're tired and they don't have much time to play with you? And the kid went, yeah, I get that. I know that. My dad does that sometimes. And I say, well, he cares so much about his work and he wants to work hard so you have a good life. So he works really hard and he gets tired. My book is about how he doesn't need to get so tired. So he can get his job done, he can take care of other people, and he can also come home and take care of you. Does
Wow.
that make sense to you? And the
Yes,
kid
it
said,
does.
yeah.
Wow. It does to me, and I'm not 6.
Was the 6-year-old part of all of us, right?
Yeah, yeah. And wow, and that's amazing because I'm from Philly, but I live in Raleigh, and I've walked beside that chocolate factory quite a bit.
Oh,
So
so you know what I'm talking about
I
for
know
there.
exactly what you're talking about. Right across from one of my favorite restaurants, the Pit, right across the
Good.
street.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I was just there a couple of weeks ago.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
I live in Seattle now, but I went back for a
Okay.
visit.
Wow, that's awesome. In the few minutes we have left, I noticed that you have a nickname that I laughed at, and I really want to ask you about that nickname. Why do they call you the Geek Whisperer?
Well, once you sort out all of leadership skills into these 6 categories, one of the levels is the interpersonal level. It's one-on-one. And so I have a whole set of techniques that help people work one-on-one and communicate and listen at a very, very high level, very well defined. And I call it perfect listening. I also teach people how to speak one sentence at a time.
Okay.
You know how geeks often you'll ask them a question and they will flood you with so much information you just drowned in it?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind
Right.
of a universal problem. Well, when I bought my very first computer, I bought it at Macy's in San Francisco. I took it home and I was so excited to use it. This is like 1980, 81. It was a portable computer, an Osborne. I went down to Silicon Valley to the users group meeting, and I was so excited. I asked questions about how to use it. And every single time, the people flooded me with so much information, I got confused and I couldn't understand what they were saying, and it wasn't helpful. So a few years later, I was responsible for computerizing the Southeast region of our company. It was an employee assistance program company. And the psychologists and the social workers at that time did not want to have anything to do with computers. They said, we got into the business of helping people. We don't want to work with machines. And I said, please just give me one chance to teach you how it works, because we've got to learn. We've got emergencies all over the world, and we have to be online helping people solve them. So they gave me 15 minutes, and that's what I did. I didn't say anything at all until somebody asked me a question. They said, when's the class going to start? And I said, it just did. And so he said, where are the chairs? There aren't any. And then they all walked over to the corner of the room where I had a computer system set up. And somebody said, what's that? And I said, it's a computer system. Pause. Somebody said, how do you turn it on? I said, that button over there. Another pause. Somebody else said, can I turn it on? I said, yes. You see what's going on here? I knew that I knew too much, and I needed to protect my students from me, the geek.
Okay.
So I only would answer a question if it was asked, and I would only answer what they in fact asked, and I would only give them one sentence at a time. Those were my rules, so I wouldn't do to them what was done to me by the geeks in Silicon Valley.
Wow.
And it worked so well. They were up and running and so excited that some months later or years later, I went into the Apple store in Raleigh, Crabtree, and I asked the genius who was helping me on a project, the Apple trained guy, I asked him a question, and he just let loose with all this information. I said, hey, stop. I'm not going to remember what you're telling me. And you're telling me stuff I didn't ask. So can we play a game? He said, oh yeah, I'll play a game. Geeks like games. So I said, I'm going to ask you a one sentence question, and I want you to give me a one sentence answer, no more. Stop there, and then I'll tell you if I have another question. And so we played that for 45 minutes, and I got more out of that session than I got out of any 10 sessions prior. That's the Geek Whisperer. It's how to get geeks, experts of all kinds, to speak one sentence at a time so you can ask and hear exactly what you need. Wow. And they can't overrun you. It also works with attorneys. It can work with any professors, physicians, doctors. It can work with anybody that has a whole lot of information and they're at risk for overrunning you.
Wow.
That's why they call me the Geek Whisperer.
I really like that. I really like that because
it's a lot of fun.
We can give so much information, you know. Wow. It's one of the reasons I'll put a little secret out or disclaimer. It's one of the reasons why on this podcast, I don't do a lengthy one, because I think, you know, we can get so much information coming at us. I noticed some that are 90 minutes long. No, we just need enough. Like you said, a one sentence one. I really like that.
Oh, maybe you can have me back and we can play the game.
No, we're definitely, yes, we definitely play the game.
Play with if we get a call-in audience and do it with them, it's a lot of fun.
Oh yeah. Oh, I'll work on that. I will definitely work on that.
All right.
Is it true? We're running out of time, but is it true that Hollywood contacted you to actually do a reality show?
Yes, they did. A few years back, I did a whole lot of conflict resolution at a conference in Southern California. I was there for a week. And when I got home, I got a phone call and they said, hi, we're these folks out in Manhattan Beach, which is basically Hollywood. They said, we want you to host a reality show on a conflict resolution for us. And I said, what are you talking about? How'd you get my name? And they said, did somebody at the conference give you a card? And they said, no, we just Googled conflict resolution and your name came up.
Wow.
and they wanted to do a show on family reconciliation, because they knew I was a clinical psychologist and a family therapist in a former life. And they wanted to do a show about how families get reconciled after being estranged. Wow. And this is not a fly-by-night group. These are the same people. It was Three Ball Productions, the people that produced The Biggest Loser.
Wow.
And a number of other shows that are very well known. And so they pursued me for a year trying to get me to do the show. And they made a video of me and they took it to A&E network up in New York, got it approved. I got an attorney in Beverly Hills and they sent me a contract, which was a total joke. So I spent a year going back and forth with these folks and negotiated a different show because I wasn't going to do one about families because it was too irresponsible. It was too dangerous to the mental health of the families. But I did get them to agree to do a show about conflict in organizations. And then, long story short, their company was bought out by a Belgian company and they put the project on the shelf and I just went on my merry way.
Wow, that's unbelievable. Well, I was going to ask you one last question, but you've already answered that question. And that question was, would you mind coming back and we can do another show, another podcast in the future? But you've already consented. And I believe, I'm not sure of I think the actor, his name, Bernie Mac, used to have a show, and he would always say, "You heard it, America." So on the podcast today, I'm saying, "You heard him, America." He said he was coming back. So we got it out there now. So now you're committed to coming back.
It would be my pleasure, David.
Yes,
Thank you
sir.
for having me.
Yes, sir. But I want to thank you so much again for spending time on the underground subway. I believe that the words that you spoke, Dr. Griggs, really will help us to be better in life by being better leaders. And if when we're better leaders, then we can really lead people to their destiny and lead them to a better life, no matter what area of leadership that we work in. So thank you so much. You really gave me a lot. I'm going to continue to listen to this podcast over and over again because I believe you can always pull something out every time you listen to it. You'll hear something different, sort of like a movie. Every time you watch that movie, you'll see something that you overlooked when you originally saw it. So thank you so much for joining us. We'll have you back real soon. To our listeners, thank you for listening to the Underground Subway. This podcast is dedicated to one thing: to make life better for all of us, to make life better for me, to make life better for you, to make life better for the next generation. It's not just about making it better for one person, but it's about making life better for ourselves as a collective unit and for the next generation. I don't want to be, I use the analogy of Harriet Tubman freeing the slaves. I don't want to be free from slavery of any sort and yet leave my children in slavery. I want us all to come out. I want my grandchildren. I want my neighbors. I want everyone. There's a song that I often play on this podcast, and it says, "I wish I knew what it was like if we all were free." We all need to be free. And Dr. Griggs talked to us about succession. He talked to us about conflict resolution. If we're going to be free, we need to be free and live in unity, in unison. As I was a little boy, I always remember my aunt would say, "You spell unity, UNITY." That says UNI. So we have to come together as one. And I'm so grateful for my new friend. I will say this: in my leaving, I had trouble in third grade spelling the word friend. I would always spell friend FREIND. I could never understand the I and the E until my third grade teacher, Miss Bussey, pulled me aside one day and said, "David, you spell friend FRIEND. The last three letters of the word friend is end because a friend will stick with you to the end." I want to thank you for joining us on the Underground Subway. And in parting, I want to issue you a challenge. I want you, before you go to bed tonight, to look yourself in the mirror. Look yourself right in the eyes. Get eyeball to eyeball. Look yourself in the face and ask yourself a question. Today, as I go to bed, did I do something to make this world a better place? Or did I waste another day? We'll see you next time on the Underground Subway.